Well, tomorrow, New Jersey and Virginia will elect a new governor in two of the most closely watched elections in the U.S. Virginia's showdown between Democrat Terry McAuliffe and Republican Glenn Youngkin has been tightening for months, and the two candidates are virtually neck and neck in recent polling. Tonight, Donald Trump will hold a virtual rally for Youngkin, who has been trying to avoid being strongly associated with the former president. And in New Jersey, incumbent Democratic Governor Phil Murphy faces off against Republican Jack Ciattarelli. Some big names have stumped for Murphy, but will the star power be enough for a state that hasn't re-elected a Democratic governor in 44 years? So to talk more about strategy, I'm joined by CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist Joel Payne and Vice President of Targeted Victory and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me so early in the morning. Let us start with Virginia, perhaps of the two races, I think kind of the most exciting one because it's so close. Joel, over the last week or so, the tides have really been, I guess, shifting a little bit for McAuliffe's team. Virginia has been considered a bellwether for midterm elections. Would a loss here trigger panic among Democrats?
Oh, Anne-Marie, don't worry. The panic's already triggered, regardless of a loss or night. Every Democrat in America is wet in the bed, which is the term we use for how we react to these moments where you get a live fire chance to see what voters are thinking. It's the closest thing to a check engine light that we've got in politics, particularly at this point in a new presidency, a year in between midterm election and between the last presidential election. So it makes a lot of sense why so many stakes would be put on this moment. I think the thing that Democrats have to somewhat rest their laurels on is that these are two heavily Democratic states. And by that, I just mean when you think about registration, number of available voters to Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic candidate in Virginia, and Phil Murphy, the Democratic candidate in New Jersey, there are just more votes to be gotten by both of those gentlemen than their opponents. That does not mean that they will necessarily win, but it means it's more likely they would win. I would compare these two races to what Beto O'Rourke was facing in Texas in 2018 it was, when he was going up against Ted Cruz. He mounted a very strong challenge, but at the end of the day, there were just more Republican votes for Ted Cruz. I imagine we might be in the same situation here, but I'm sure my friend Matt enjoys having Democrats like me stressed out and wondering what's going to happen in these states as we come down the final stretch here.
Well, Matt, let me ask you, McAuliffe's team has really been trying to link Glenn Youngkin to the former president, President Trump. Youngkin has been walking this tightrope where he's not, I wouldn't exactly call him separating himself from the former president or even distancing himself, but he's trying to kind of play it right down the middle. However, the former president will be holding this virtual rally for Youngkin tonight. What sort of impact do we expect this rally could have?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, Joel's right. I love a stressed out Democrat every now and then. But look, the fact we're even having this conversation, I think, speaks to the momentum on our side. I mean, the last time a Republican won statewide office in Virginia, I was an intern in Washington with a full head of hair. So it's been a while. But look, I think the key is Terry McAuliffe is running this race because he knows it's a Democratic state. Every word out of his mouth or every sentence out of his mouth is a noun, a verb, and Donald Trump. He wants to nationalize this race. However, I think the key in why Youngkin has been pretty successful is he's talking about things like education and parents' involvement in that, crime and school safety in particular, but also I think inflation, right? So he's talking about repealing the grocery tax and suspending the gas tax, things that everyday Virginians can kind of understand. And I think that is why you're seeing this momentum. Look, win or lose, there's a lot more states next year that Republicans will be competing in that are a little more purple or even a little more tinted red than Virginia. So the fact we're talking about this is a pretty good sign and pretty heartening for me as we go into next year.
I want to ask you guys how you feel about the fact that it's so close. Are you surprised that there's sort of a razor-thin margin between the two? I'll ask you, Matt, first.
I got to be honest, I am, but I think that's a credit to, Glenn Youngkin's team. Look, there's going to be a lot of folks. There's packed crowds, which is awesome right now, but they laid the groundwork in the spring and summer and early fall. And I think the key is they've been just hammering relentlessly these messages that actually appeal to Virginians. And so now it kind of really caught Terry off guard. And I've been on both sides of this, especially the losing side. At this point, if you're losing momentum, you're just trying to throw anything against the wall and see if it sticks. And I think that is why we're seeing a little bit of desperation coming from Terry McAuliffe's camp.
And Joel, what's your take on this? I mean, Biden did quite well in Virginia. Are you surprised by how close things are?
Yeah, again, I'll just repeat. It's a very, very heavily Democratic state that Terry McAuliffe's in. It was +4 for Barack Obama in 12. It was +5 for Hillary Clinton in 16. It was +10 for Biden in 2020. Again, does that mean that Terry McAuliffe's absolutely going to win? No. In fact, he won this state by a razor-thin margin when he was elected governor the first time in 2013. I imagine you may see a margin close to that. That was about a 3-point margin that he won by. I think if Terry McAuliffe wins, it'll be inside of 5 points. So I always think that this was going to be a close race. I do agree with Matt. I think the Youngkin campaign has run a pretty smart race, particularly focusing on that issue of education. I think what Terry McAuliffe and his team have focused on is tying Glenn Youngkin to Donald Trump. Donald Trump not doing any favors for Glenn Youngkin to that town hall, and also the issues of COVID and of choice in Virginia have been big drivers.
All right. On to New Jersey. Joel, President Biden, former President Obama, Congressman Jim Clyburn, Senator Bernie Sanders, all these heavy hitters have come out to rally for the Democratic governor, Phil Murphy. One of the questions that we've been asking is sort of why, because he's polling quite well. What's the strategy behind why so many Democratic heavy hitters has showed up to participate in this race?
Well, when you have states that are heavily in your favor like this, turnout is the key, right? You have two types of campaigns. You have persuasion campaigns, you have turnout campaigns. This is a turnout campaign for Democrats. They know they've got the advantage with persuasion. They just need to get the voters out. And how do you do that? You excite the base. You spike enthusiasm by bringing folks like Bernie Sanders, like President Obama, big name folks that you know are going to draw people to big events. And what do you do after and before the event? Hey, would you like to come over and register to vote? And would you actually like to come and vote? And we've seen the 2 weeks of early voting, or I think a week and a half early voting in New Jersey. There have been pretty solid numbers. Going back to Virginia for a moment, there's 6 weeks of early voting. So that helps you kind of stay the tide of if there's a late turn in polling, you've already banked a lot of votes. And that's why Democrats have been so dominant in early voting in Virginia and in New Jersey, like we're talking about. That's gonna, that stress that we were talking about before with Democrats like me. I think those facts tend to give you a little bit of solace when you think about just the state of the race.
Right. So sometimes when we talk about politics, I think it's similar to when I hear people talk about baseball, because it's just, to me, baseball is just a bunch of statistics whenever baseball enthusiasts talk about it. So when we talk about races, it feels like, we're bouncing around statistics. So here's a stat for you, Matt. New Jersey hasn't reelected a Democratic governor in 44 years, which was actually news to me, thanks to the producer. I know this. Should the Murphy party be nervous? And what would a win for Republicans mean for the state of New Jersey?
Look, I think it'd be a big surprise, quite frankly, if Republicans won New Jersey. I think both sides concede it's probably a little less close than Virginia. And look, I agree with mostly what Joel said. This is going to be a turnout election for New Jersey. If they get the Democratic voters out, they're likely going to win. However, I bet you the Murphy campaign's probably looking and sitting and seeing what they're seeing in Virginia. Terry McAuliffe probably caught off a little off guard. They don't want that to happen, right? So they're juicing the base. They're getting all these Democratic superstars out to make sure that people are voting. So I think that is the difference you're seeing between New Jersey and Virginia.
Interesting stuff. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Joel Payne, Matt Gorman. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.
CBSN is your place for election night this year. Elaine Keano, Ed O'Keefe, and Major Garrett will have live coverage and analysis of all of the top races across the country. You can stream that right here tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern.